How is it that you set and determine culture? And how do you scale culture? And before you answer that question, Netflix is famous for having a 128-page document that's on the web, that's public, about your culture. Tell us about culture, about setting it and then scaling it.
I'd have to say for the first 4 years, all we cared about was survival. So we were, not cash flow positive. We were founded in 97, and so we were in the first internet bubble. So we raised a bunch of money during the bubble, then it crashed. We didn't have enough money to get profitable. It was tough. We did a big layoff. We kind of, skimmed into profitability just as, we had raised $100 million, and we got down to $5 million in the bank before we turned cash flow positive. So mostly we were concerned with, is this business model going to be able to be profitable, fundable? And it was only after the IPO that we really started to want to be conscious about culture. I'm not saying this is right or wrong to do,
but you put it off quite a while.
Yes, in terms of the articulation. I mean, there was the intuitive part, which is who we were as people. But no, none of what we wrote down, we could have set freedom and responsibility, high performance culture. So we started, now that we're public and we're going to, be around for a while, to think, okay, we should be more articulate with new employees. And so the deck that you all have read originally was an internal deck, and we would go through in new employee orientation. I would spend an hour with people. And most of the time their managers had told them all the different aspects, and some of the time not. And then the people who this was the first time they had seen it were fall off of their chairs. Like, what did I get into? And the reason we ended up publishing it is because we wanted to make sure everyone who applied, really got it. And so it's a way essentially of making sure that, people knew what they wanted, because we knew that it wasn't for everyone. And we were very surprised about how positive the reaction was, and that it caught on, because again, it was aimed at being a public link so our hiring managers could refer to it. Because we knew if we sent it to all candidates, it would get out anyway. So that's why we put it up. And that deck we worked on and continue to work on as a living document. Every year we would try to define some things and make some improvements about how we felt was there.
How many of the founders here believe you had a great culture at the start of your venture? Hands in the air, please. And separate question, how many of you fear that you're going to lose your culture as you grow? Okay, so then the question is, Reed, what do you do to not lose a culture if you believe you've got a great one early on?
Yeah, one of the most common questions new employee asks is, how do we preserve the culture? And I say, to preserve something, to pickle it is the wrong solution. We're not trying to preserve the culture, we're trying to make it better. And it's materially better than it was 5 years ago, and I'll cite a couple of specific examples. And then say, your job, in addition to doing your role, is to figure out how do we get even better. Because it's only when you struggle to get better that you really keep it vital and alive. So you always have to be saying, yeah, it's pretty good culture, but I'm sure it can be better. How can we be better? And so it's that struggle to improve that keeps it fresh.
Do you think culture is a strong reflection of the founder or the CEO?
Yes, I think it certainly is in the founding situation.
Right.
But then I think if the cultural roots are strong, new leadership is developed in that model and will often continue the culture. It's pretty hard to do radical shifts of the culture, or you tend to do that only if something's really broken and it was a very unhealthy culture.
Yeah.
So you endeavor to have a culture that really is highly effective at getting important work done.
What were you thinking when you went from math in Swaziland to applying to both Stanford and MIT for a master's in computer science?
I was math undergrad, and I didn't want to be a math professor. It seemed just too dry, and so then I thought, okay, I'll teach math. And then after 2 or 3 years of teaching high school math, I was trying to read all these math papers, and I wanted something kind of in between. I thought, AI, that's going to be some blend of intensely intellectual, and they both had AI programs, and this was in the first AI bubble, right? now we're in another big AI bubble, but there was one in the mid-'80s with Ed Feigenbaum and all that stuff. And, so that was why I applied there. And then, it's not a huge surprise because I didn't have any computer science background, but I didn't get into MIT. The huge surprise is that Stanford let me in.
In MIT?
Why didn't they? I don't know why they didn't let me in.
They made a mistake.
I guess so. But, it was okay because I'd never been to California. And so in the end of 86, I drove out to California. And I know it sounds so naive, but I was like, oh my God, people live like this? This is incredible. I was so naive. And boy, have I loved being in California for the last 30 years. And I'm happy that my kids are native Californians. And so that was life-changing.
Okay, so we've set the stage now for a lightning round. We're going to shift gears slightly. Reed, House of Cards or Orange in the New Black?
House of Cards for me.
Inspired by politics?
No, I mean, the key thing is many people like very different titles. So we try to do a super variety. There's, it's a mistake to try to rate titles. What happens is you find for almost any film or TV show, you find, if you look at the reviews, 5-star, incredible, 1-star, terrible, light, trash. And, the variation of how we all react to art is quite variable. And that's really the power of personalization. And so what Netflix is about is creating an incredible experience, for 13-year-olds, for 30-year-olds, for 70-year-olds, all different places.
Stanford or MIT?
Stanford.
The first Netflix DVD that you rented?
Ooh, the title? Don't know.
Don't know. The first Netflix movie or show that you streamed?
Heroes.
Your favorite movie of all time?
Oh, a terrible question. Sophie's Choice.
And your favorite TV show of all time?
Right now it's BoJack Horseman.
And how much bandwidth do you have to your home?
It's an element of frustration, but about 40 megs.
And your views on net neutrality?
Very important to the future of human society.
And what role did you play in getting that net neutrality decision to go the way it did?
Not a hugely significant one. There's been many. So there was, for the Title II one that the president declared his desire for, and then the FCC independently came to that decision, almost none.
You didn't personally lobby? Did you call anyone?
No, I mean, honestly, we and most of the industry looked at Title II as impossibly ambitious because the cable and telco industry see it as, nuclear war. And so it was like if you lobby for that, if you touch that as, it was off the radar as a possibility.
Impossible.
So it was quite a shock when the president was willing to go there. And we'll see. It may work out very well. I would say that the telcos are worried that if price regulation comes in through Title II, that the capital markets will react very poorly to that, and that there will be much less funding to invest in new broadband.
Does that argument have merit?
It's a risk. It's not, without risk. So in anything, you got to balance the risks. It does put net neutrality on a firm legal footing, and the prior attempts to thread the needle on, that legal basis for net neutrality had failed utterly. So it arguably was the only place to go. And now we have to see how things work. But remember that almost every regulation, if you look up far enough back, it's misfired over time because it got put into place in a context in which it was important. And 20 and 30 years later, you can see some of the negative effects of it. So you just have to be ready to update it.
Okay. So let's connect back to the business building that we're all doing here in this room from really startup companies. In fact, I met a CEO here we decided to fund last week to businesses of considerable size and consequence. And talk about your first startup, which was Pure, right? Pure Software. You saw that business through an IPO, through a merger, and a sale of the business, all in 2 years.
So my first business was when I was at Stanford, and I noticed that, when you type and then go to the mouse and type and go to the mouse, it's inefficient. And I wanted to be able to type faster, so we developed a foot mouse. And you controlled it with a foot, and, you know, it's amazing what you could do. And I thought this whole business plan, I was going to be in the foot mouse business. And it turns out if you do this for more than a few minutes, your leg gets really sore, and the mouse gets really dirty. It's a very dirty environment on the floor. And
carpal thigh
the thing I thought would be transformative of human productivity turned out to be a disaster. So that went down. And then I came up with the idea for this first product called Purify, if any of you were C and C++ programmers. And then from 91 to 97, so it was 6 years, was Pure Software. Was an amazing adventure because I never set out to be CEO. I didn't, I just wanted to do the product. I was very product driven, and this particular product was for other software developers, so, you know, it was a match. But it was very frustrating because I was and felt underwater a lot of the time. So the products were great. It was an incredible product market fit. So we doubled every year for 6 years, and along that we changed as enterprise sales to major corporations, and we changed our VP of sales. I changed every year for 5 years in a row. Okay, so I just couldn't pick. I kept picking the wrong type of person because I just didn't know that much.
But the sales doubled every year.
So you think how hard that is to do, of sales doubling, turning over the VP of sales. So, and the real thing is I just felt like a failure because I was clearly making these big wrong decisions. And it was the feeling of the company deserves better. And so twice I went into the board that Andy Ratcliffe was on the board, and Michael Leventhal, and said, you know, we got to get someone else to run the company because this is awful for the company. And twice they said, yeah, you really are making a big mistakes, but we still would rather have you do those mistakes than take the other set of risks. And so it gave me absolution or resolution because I could kind of, they were my confessor, and then I could forgive myself. And one of the hardest things is when you make big mistakes as a leader is being able to forgive yourself because you just, you know, for the sake of the enterprise, you just feel terrible. And yet you have to realize that, hey, if you gave it your cleanest, most ethical, best, hardest thinking shot, that's all you can hold yourself accountable for, not the outcome. But that's hard.
So how do you make that hard call when somebody, either one of two hard calls, somebody's not doing the job or it's close, it's a really tough call, or that you found the right person to hire? How many CEOs struggle with this in their companies today? A lot of us.
Yeah, I don't have any super good advice. I mean, it's definitely a practice thing, at least in my case. Now that I've hired enough people, my radar is much better to a number of at least failure scenarios. I do a lot of references. I'm basically of the view that people could buffalo you in 4 or 6 hours, and so don't pay too much attention to the interview. The interview is like a narrowing round, and then you really go deep on the blind references, and you really work those references. And you've all given references of someone that's okay, but you like them a lot, and you don't care about the company calling you, and you say, "Oh, they're really good. You don't really lie, but
maybe not forthcoming,
and so you got to recognize in references that the people will act consistent with their past, and so you just have to work the network to get close. You have to find ways of connecting to people. I'll tend to try to Skype references because they have a much harder time lying to me looking at my video than voice. But anyway, it would be really big focus on the references. And I'm amazed when I know of people that either have worked at Netflix or others, and people hire them and they didn't even try to call. And so I think that the reference checking thing is not as thorough as you would think.
And so how much of your time do you spend doing references? How deep in your organization before Netflix hires an important engineer or an important leader?
I mean, it's mostly the hiring manager's responsibility. So if it's someone reporting to me, hours figuring out, who will get me to that person. Like if I realize the person that is someone that John's worked with, then I would call John, and you got to build enough trust that whatever they're going to say is stay just with you, and then if it doesn't work out, you got to find a way to never let it get traced back, and you got to build confidence about that. It's about the references and getting to confidence, at least for me.
Let's back up to Pure Software for just one more question.
Yeah.
That is, how did Pure prepare you for Netflix? What were the most important lessons that hopefully helped?
Yeah, it helped, but it was learned by fire. I mean, I mentioned the turnover on the VPs of sales, and there was many other similar things. That then I had time. We got bought by our largest competitor in '97 after missing our numbers, and so it was a soft landing to what would have been very bad news. And then I just had time to reflect, that time on the beach, and think about what I wanted to do. I thought initially I would, just be like Jim Clark and kind of fund a bunch of companies. And then I really missed operating. And so then I got back into Netflix. There was 3 companies. The other ones are gone now, went under when the bubble crashed. But Netflix has been super fun. And for me, it's redemption because I got to start over as a CEO. And I was in the first company as a very good product person, but I was not a good CEO. Or I was not a great CEO. So I was sincere, but naive. And then in the second company, because you get to start over, you're much more thoughtful. And, first we were 20 people and 50, and, the first company had been 700, so that was like no big deal. And so then it was just a chance to do it over and do it better. And I've definitely enjoyed the Netflix much more than Pure. Pure, I was the feeling of near drowning constantly by the growth and by my lack of preparation. But I would say, compared to all of you, I was unsophisticated. I was just a hardcore engineer. And, most of the entrepreneurs I meet, like those of you in this room, you're definitely more sophisticated than I was at the time. One of the best books I ever read at that time, which is still out, is Jim Collins' book, Beyond Entrepreneurship. You all know him for Good to Great and Built to Last. But his earlier book, Beyond Entrepreneurship, like the first 65 pages, you should memorize. It's that good. And really talks to the entrepreneur building their company.
So this is a 2-part question. What's the most important thing to do, if you can think back to it, from a dozen to say 200, and then from 200 to 2,000? Is that a good break point?
Sure. You have to be authentic. I mean, you've got no hope if you try to pretend to be Reed Hastings or Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or whoever you want to think your CEOs are that you've met. That is crazy. And you got to really get comfortable with yourself, your strengths and weaknesses. People are inspired by authenticity, and I'm just surprised how many people feel like they're acting or try to act. And you may be a really quiet person, and that's fine. But if you have that fierce will, that desire for the institution, the company to be great, and your own role in that is secondary, and you authentically express that in whatever ways you do, then you'll be greatly accepted. Okay, and so that's all it takes, is to be authentic and not try to be something else, and to fundamentally care at your core about what's good for the company. And if everybody knows and you act in the notion of what's good, as best as your judgment can tell, what's good for the company, they will see that, and people will follow you, and they won't be cynical. It's when you hide things, it's when you pretend, that you lose trust very quickly.
So Netflix, by the numbers, it accounts for 35% of the traffic on the internet. You have 65 million subscribers, you reported, in the quarter just ended, and a $47 billion market cap. What are your superpowers?
Well, look, fundamentally, we're trying to do something big. We're trying to end boredom and loneliness. And boredom and loneliness have been a human affliction, and it's an affliction of our cognitive state. Lower order animals, are not as much afflicted by boredom and loneliness. And entertainment arose as a way to cope with boredom and loneliness. And we're really trying to do much better entertainment. And when you think about it, like some moment when you had with a friend and you watched some incredible TV show, and how connected you felt with your friend and with the show and with the characters, and how if you're in the middle of a series you can't wait to get home that night and watch the next episode. I mean, that is a great feeling, and that's what we're trying to bring more of. So I joke with Larry Page that he's trying to make the world more productive and I'm trying to make it less productive. Okay, so my goal is to be better than Google at reducing human productivity and getting you to love life and not work.
And who's ahead in this contest?
He's still ahead, but we're working it.
Do you consider yourself a media mogul? When you go to the Allen and Company conference?
We're in media, but no, not a mogul. The mogul personality is someone who's larger than life, and they've got 5 girlfriends and 3 homes and all this stuff, and I'm boring.
Is Jeff Bezos a media mogul?
No.
Do you compete with Jeff Bezos?
Yeah, we compete for shows. We bid against them and HBO and Showtime, for original productions. But entertainment, people will consume multiple sources. Really, we compete with everything you do to relax. We compete with video gaming. We compete with drinking a bottle of wine. That's a particularly tough one. We compete with other video networks, playing board games. Think of everything you do to relax, or think of any night you did not watch Netflix. What you did, that was the we compete with work. Like, you work too much. You work at night, and so it's such a broad competition that when Amazon does great work, or HBO, we don't notice it in our numbers, because people want and crave great entertainment.
Do you make the decisions to greenlight entertainment in series? These are $100 million investments.
Thankfully, no. My colleague, our chief content officer, Ted Sarandos, who's in LA, has become an expert in it. But no one bet. So we'll spend about $5 billion next year on content, and so
$5 billion.
Yeah, so $100 million.
How much cash do you have?
Cash in the bank?
Yeah.
2.
In liquid securities.
Yeah.
2, and you'll spend 5 on
and 2, and I think we should have 1, because we have subscription revenue. I mean,
how much that was $1.6 billion last quarter, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's 6 this year, so that's 8 next year. So
it does seem you're tacking kind of close to the win.
I think it's horrible how mismanaged most Silicon Valley companies are in capital. They store capital. Let's do the Microsoft example. Okay, always wanted to have a lot of cash on hand. Apple had no cash 15 years ago in 2000. Who did the most innovation? Okay, the cash does not help. The cash insulates you in a bad way, and it's a bad thing that companies store cash. But why do they do it? Because board members are over-concentrated reputationally. The only thing you never want to happen as a board member is to see bankruptcy. And so we have an inefficiency in terms of capitalism, because they will eliminate any possible risk of on-their-watch bankruptcy, because they say they want, safety buffer. It's inefficient to have too much insurance. You all recognize that. And that's what lots of cash.
That's what lots of cash.
Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. All
right. Subscription revenue helps, quoting me.
The amount of capital you have, if you're Boeing and your capital goods and you've got those cycles, is quite different, and you should plan to get through that cycle. But that's not the case of many of our businesses.
As Eric Schmidt has said, revenue overcomes all problems. Okay, so Reed, I read that you offered to sell 49% of Netflix to Blockbuster at one point in time. And I know you have strong views about founders selling companies or not selling companies, so...
Well, this is probably 2000, and we're 10 million in revenue. Blockbuster's $5 billion, and we recognize it's pretty asymmetric. If this gets big enough that they're going to come in and protect their market, and so we thought, well, maybe they'll let us run Blockbuster.com for the benefit of both of us. And if they had, we would have been 100 times bigger faster, because it would have been Blockbuster.com. We wanted to maintain control because we knew they would screw it up. But in hindsight, it was a little naive because it was too important for them to be able to say, okay, we're going to give up the name and what that represents in exchange for half the equity. But it was worth a try. And they were very thoughtful and courteous about it.
At any other time did you consider selling?
Not in any, no. We never had an offer, never a big thing.
What's in store for the future of Netflix?
Well, when we think about what's going to disrupt Netflix, probably internet streaming is like electricity, where it's got a couple 100-year run. It's unlikely because it's a substrate foundation of which things are built on top. So we don't think we're going to get disrupted in terms of the delivery technology. So the likely case when we eventually have a disruption threat would be some new form of entertainment that's so compelling that you come to look at movies and TV shows as to be like a novel. Like, read it once a year maybe, and it's just a nice, cute, small business. And in fact, what everyone is doing is, an Oculus Rift with a morphine drip. And so you compare that experience against watching a good TV show, and, that's uneven odds. So eventually there'll be some tech-based entertainment forms, which supplant movies and TV shows. So for a decade or two, we'll ride with that business, and then we've got to be aware of what are the substitutes to it.
Fantastic. A sort of direct implant.